Welcome to Bornholm, a fantastic little island situated here in the middle of the Baltic Sea. My name is Gordon, and I've been coming to this island for the last 14 years, together with a group of friends, and fishing here every winter and spring. We're going to give you detailed information about this location, about the biology of the sea trout here. We're going to tell you about the different spots, how to choose them depending on the conditions, the season, and the weather. We're going to talk about tackle and gear for both spin and fly fishing. Hopefully we can give you a lot of tips and some good advice so you can plan your own adventure here on Bornholm. Fish are here. The fact that Bornholm is here in the middle of the Baltic Sea means two things that are pretty important to the fishing here. For one, the water temperature is usually higher than the rest of Denmark because we're out here surrounded by deep ocean. The other thing is that the salinity is pretty low here, and both those two factors play a large role in the trout's feeding habit. In general, when the water gets cold, trout feed less, and in general, when there's a high salinity in the water, the trout have to expel salt by a process called osmosis. So having higher temperatures and less salt means that where trout normally don't feed a lot in the winter, on Bornholm, the trout feed at least a little bit more than other places similar to this. Bornholm has some really unique physical, environmental, and biological conditions. I'd even say the fish here are pretty special. There's 27 rivers here on Bornholm that have their own wild, self-reproducing sea trout that go up and spawn here, partly due to a lot of volunteers and others who make an effort to keep it this way. That means that when you're fishing here, it's wild sea trout you're fishing on. There's no stocking of fish here. And the sea trout that roam here can get really, really big. And every year there's caught some of the +5 kilo, sometimes even bigger sea trout here. So if you're dreaming of big fish, this is one of the places that you definitely want to consider. That being said, it's definitely not an easy place to fish. It takes a lot of effort, hopefully some luck, and a good bit of knowledge to fish here. And hopefully that knowledge is some of what we can give you in this movie. For spin fishing, I'd recommend a set like this. You want to be able to cast bigger lures into waves and wind, but you also want to be able to fish a little bit smaller, lighter lures sometimes. So a 9-foot rod, this one has a casting weight up to 28 gram, a 30 or 3000 size reel with braided line from anywhere between 0.12 to 0.15 millimeters, and then with a piece of fluorocarbon, maybe around 0.28 or 0.30. A tippet of just over a meter, and then yeah, you're good to go. In terms of terminal tackle, that's of course a huge discussion. You got to figure out what works for you. And one of the things I like to do is to go to the local tackle shop here on the island, where they of course have all the things that really work here, and they know what works here, what times of season, what weather, and there you can really get some good tips and not just get the tackle, but get the tips included in the price. Some of the most popular items over here are plugs. We call them in Danish coast wobblers, like this. They are far casting. You can fish them pretty slow, and they don't have too erratic an action in the water. There's different types of those. And then of course spoons, where some of the ones that are really popular are inline spoons, like this one's here. And they have the advantage that they can spin on the drop. There's a lot of different lures to choose between. Natural colors are always a good bet, especially when the water's clear. But when the water's real murky, a lot of people tend to like to use some more brighter colors, either red or something green and yellow like this. I like to bring 2 rods and have one especially rigged for fishing with a bombarda and a fly. This is a super effective mode to present a very, very small bait, a small lure at a big distance and cover a big area. A bombarda float like this, you can get in from 20 to 25, 30 gram. This one is 25. Cast super good. This is a slow sinking version, so the fly fishes about 1 meter down. You can fish it fast, you can fish it slow, you can fish it with a lot of spin stops and very varied. Sometimes if the fish are out there, varying how you pull the fly is maybe what's going to trigger them to bite. I like to use a long rod. This one's 10 feet. And that's because I want a long leader. 3 meters, 10-foot leader is very, very important. And you need a long rod so you can control this when you're fighting the fish and when you're trying to land it. And there it also comes in handy with a net. One other little detail is this little thing. It's just a plastic stick. I like to have my bombardas rigged, ready to go like this. And this actually kind of turns out here in the cast, so you don't get the line caught up over your main line up there. The leader material I use for this is 028 fluorocarbon, but you could use 25, 030. I like it to have a little bit strong here because there are big fish out here. We're going to talk about the flies themselves in a little bit when we talk more about fly fishing in general. One of the big questions is, of course, how do you choose which spot to fish? And there's no easy answer to that question. The fact that Bornholm is an island means you have basically 4 sides, and there's great sea trout fishing spots pretty much all around the island. The southern side is a lot of sand with some reefs and some points that are really interesting, and the north end of the island is more rocky and more cliffs. The fact that it's an island means that you can always find lee and find an area without too much wind and waves when the weather is rough. But actually, sometimes you want to try find the wind and the waves. A lot of people who fish Bornholm, they prefer it rough. They go to the places where the wind and the waves are coming in because they like the water to be churned around, and sometimes the trout, they feed more in that type of water. So often you want to look at the weather report and see where's the wind going to be coming, or sometimes even better, where was the wind yesterday, so that you have the big waves coming in without so much wind. Because there's so many different spots to fish, it can be really, really hard to choose. Of course, you can hire a fishing guide who knows the island and knows what's going on. But one thing that I really recommend you to get is some of these small folders that the tourism agency has produced. They're in English, German, and Danish, and this one has 16 different fishing spots all over the island on the 4 coasts. And what's really cool about this is it describes the spots, but it also has aerial photos of them. So if it's like a spot with some reef and some cliffs and some underwater structure, you get a good idea of what the spot looks like. Last but not least, I'd also recommend that you check out the local tackle store. If you bring out your wallet and buy a little bit of fishing tackle, often you'll get some really good up-to-date local tips included in the price. They know where the fish have been caught lately.
Så farer du sydligt, og så kan du selv, du ser 10 meter per sekund en direkte vest.
They know what the weather report are and what the conditions are, so there you can really get some good useful tips on a day-to-day basis.
Ein auf die Meerforelle Blinker som ist Classic Bornholm. Die werfen gut. Das ist, man kann nichts sagen.
Bjarke, you are a local here from Bornholm. You're a good friend, and you're also a fly fishing guide. And I've been glad to have the opportunity to fish with you here. What do you think about Bornholm as an island and a fly fishing destination?
From late September to late May, where we got a quite good season.
Yep.
And in my opinion, it's maybe one of the most beautiful and most raw spots in Denmark.
And we've talked about the varied coastline here, and the fact is a lot of the places that the trout are close to shore, and we've talked about how they feed on very little items, so fly fishing can be ideal. Yeah. In terms of tackle, this is what I use, and I've seen it's something very similar that you use.
A single-handed fly rod with 6 can do it all.
And this line here is an intermediate line. It's clear. With the line like this, it kind of cuts through the waves, so you can fish in a little bit rough conditions, and you can fish a fly fairly slow, which you sometimes want to be doing. One of the things I know a lot of people obviously are going to ask is what flies are the good flies to use. Yeah. So let's take a look in each other's fly boxes. What do you think? No. This one here is I know one of the or at least my version, my home tide version of a local fly that's unique to Bornholm, called skønne, the shadow. But let's take a look what you got.
Oh. My box is quite simple, actually. It's a golden fly.
Yeah, the gold basse.
The gold basse, yeah. I got it in copper version too. And I always bring shrimp imitation and something, we call it polar magnus. That's basically what I use. And in the winter season, we need basically small flies. And I always have this joker with me.
Yeah, I know. That's one of your specialties, that you do the sight fishing on the dry fly for the trout. I'm definitely going to have to come and try that sometime. Yeah. And I really love and enjoy tying the flies myself. You can find patterns and videos about how to tie a lot of these flies online. And of course, tackle shops, both here on Bornholm and other places, will carry some of these pretty classic patterns for what works over here. Bornholmer fisk. Woo! Now I want to talk a little bit more about equipment, but not the equipment you use for catching fish. I want to talk about the equipment that keeps you warm, dry, and safe. Fishing on Bornholm can be great in the winter when it's cold and when it's rough like it is out here today. So you want to be sure that you can stay warm. Of course, you want a warm hat, and gloves are nice. I really like ones like these where you have the fingers available for tying knots and stuff like that. There's something called the 3-layer principle, which is ideal for this type of fishing. You want to have an inner layer that can transport your sweat and be warm. I have a merino wool long underwear here. And you want to have a middle layer, which can be fleece or Primaloft, something like that. And then an outer layer where you have, of course, your waders, and then a waterproof, windproof wading jacket. So that way you're ready to be out when there's wind and when there's rain. In terms of safety, there are spots like where we are now at a place called Sorthat, where you can get out on a reef and wade pretty far out. I would be a little bit sketched about going out there in these waves today. So be smart, don't go out where it's too rough. There can be slippery rocks. Be with a buddy so you can keep an eye on each other, and wade carefully. A lot of these reefs and rocky shorelines do have either big rocks that you can fall over or holes and dips that you can fall into. So you always want to wade carefully. One thing that's really nice to have is a wading staff like this, and it just kind of gives you a third leg and some extra balance, and you can also use it to kind of poke and feel and make sure that there's not a hole or a big rock that you're about to fall over. You want to make sure that you have some wading boots with some good traction. This is a rubber sole on this one, and you can also get some models that have spikes in them. And another little piece of equipment that's not so much maybe for safety and being warm and comfortable is having a net with you, because when you're standing out there in the waves and the fish of your dreams is on, it's nice to just be able to grab your net and have a safe landing attempt at that fish. One of the main reasons that Bornholm can have this very special fishing that it has is because of rivers like this, where the trout come up and spawn and reproduce. A big effort is made from volunteers and others to make sure that the trout have this possibility. And when you come here as a fisherman to this island, it's also your responsibility to help take good care of the trout. A lot of fishermen nowadays put the fish back, even if you are allowed to keep them. Here we are in bl.a. in Selene Bay, and rivers like this have protected zones where you're not allowed to fish around them. Some of these are year-round, and some of them are only for a certain period of time. And you can get the up-to-date information on several websites and apps. There's also some laws regarding the fishery that you need to be familiar with. For instance, if you're between 18 and 65, you have to have a fishing permit that covers the whole coastline in Denmark. There's a minimum size limit on the trout, and they have to be 40 centimeters for you to be allowed to keep them. And a lot of fishermen actually want them to be a little bit bigger. And a lot of fishermen also put the really big ones back. Here on Bornholm, there's a special rule, and you're only allowed to keep 3 trout per person per day. The special thing about this rule is that it also covers commercial fishermen and people fishing with nets. This is a great way to maintain the resource and prevent overfishing. In general, it's looked down upon to take fish that are either pre-spawn or post-spawn home with you if they're darker and they're colored, and most people say that they're not good eating anyway. It's also against the law. There's a certain period where you're not allowed to take these post-spawn fish, and this period is actually even longer here on Bornholm. These rules, laws, and regulations can change, so make sure you're up to date on what the law is today, and you can use these websites or apps to get this information.
Here we are at the brewery and restaurant in Sverige, and for me it's a tradition that every time I come fishing on Bornholm, I come here to eat and have a few beers. A lot of people think that because the tourists mainly come in the summertime that the island shuts down in the winter, and that's not the case. There's lots of restaurants, bars, bakeries, fine dining, places that are open in the winter. In terms of lodging, there's also plenty to choose from. There's hostels, there's cabins, you can tent, lots of summer houses to rent. And in the summertime, which is the main tourism season over here, the summer houses can be pretty high to rent. But in the wintertime, so few people come here, so the prices on the rentals are really, really low. And a good tip if you're a bigger group is to rent one of the big houses that has pool, sauna, all that stuff, and you can get some really great deals on that, and that's what I usually do with a bunch of my buddies.
I hope you enjoyed the program, learned a thing or two, and if you're coming to Bornholm to fish, I wish you a great trip.